Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Dwayne Barnes, SVP here at RapidScale. I'm going to give everyone another minute or two to join. So good morning on the West Coast, where I happen to be sitting today out in our Irvine headquarters, and good afternoon to those folks on the East Coast. So again, we'll get started here in just 1 minute. All right, thanks for joining, everyone. Again, my name is Dwayne Barnes. I'm responsible for technology here at RapidScale. This week I'm out on the West Coast in our Irvine headquarters, so happy to be out here supporting our agents and customers this week. Today's topic is on SD-WAN. So we're pretty excited about this one. I know there's probably going to be a ton of questions after this presentation, which is totally okay. We have moderators on the GoToMeeting ready to answer them through the GoToMeeting chat. We also will capture those, any that don't get answered, and follow up via email afterwards. And of course, we'll have live Q&A towards the end of this presentation and try to answer as many of them as we can over the broadcast here. We are recording this session, so you will be able to find this in our partner portal shortly afterwards today. So if you want to follow back up and watch it or distribute it to any of your peers, you're more than welcome to do so. If for some reason you can't access the partner portal, always feel free to email marketing@rapidscale.net, and our fantastic marketing team will get back to you promptly. All right, so real quick, the agenda. Our SD-WAN solution is based on the Citrix NetScaler product line. So we're going to talk a little bit about that relationship, the overall marketplace, which I think most of you are likely familiar with, especially being in the channel. It's one of the hottest topics out there these days. Of course, we'll dive into the NetScaler product itself, as well as a general how to sell it. And then we always, as Bobby Cannon joined the team running sales and marketing, we've added this last section called Anatomy of a Deal, and this is more or less, dissecting a specific opportunity that we've won in a given region, and going over that use case with everybody so we understand, what problem was solved, what challenges were present, and how the solution helped a particular customer. So our relationship with Citrix, RapidScale has been a Citrix partner since our inception. Citrix has been in business since 1989. So they're one of the longest standing software companies in the US. We currently deploy multiple Citrix products to our customers. So obviously we're known as a cloud desktop provider. So we predominantly use Citrix solutions for that offering. We also do a fair amount of share file business through the Citrix product line. And then most recently, the NetScaler SD-WAN solution. So again, when you combine those all together, it really does make for an impactful customer experience. And of course, we like to mention our recent award from Citrix. We were named the top innovator for enablement back in 2016. And we're looking forward to hopefully receiving some more awards from them here in the coming months. So digital disruption. So you guys know, obviously, 5 years ago, nobody was talking about SD-WAN. Certainly, there's plenty of products out there that had SD-WAN-esque capabilities, specifically around like WAN failover and WAN load balancing and stuff like that. It just simply wasn't called SD-WAN. No different than, before we started calling cloud computing, it was just simply called virtualization. So marketing has taken over this one and certainly lumped a ton of different products and services and solutions and even reference architectures into the SD-WAN category. But these days, there's a ton of disruption going on. You have the network providers all partnering with the Velo Clouds and Talaris of the world to try and, stop cannibalizing their MPLS revenues. You have a ton of employee disruption. Again, we like to categorize people in the millennials category. I don't particularly like that stereotype, as we have plenty of millennials working here at RapidScale. They're fantastic employees, but they definitely bring a different set of challenges from their, growing up, basically never not knowing the internet, right? Where us older folks didn't have the internet till we were in college. So they're coming in and pushing, employers to think differently. And you can consider that like a bring your own device policy, for example. They want to have their devices, so to speak, from the laptops and mobile devices and tablets, and they're not necessarily keen on getting a ThinkPad handed to them. So you have that, you have mobility, right? How do you secure and protect mobile data? And then of course you can extrapolate that down to Internet of Things and eventually AI or artificial intelligence. So this definitely technology has moved vastly forward in the last couple of years. And then I don't know how many of you guys follow the Apple, but their latest and greatest iPhones now have augmented reality capabilities. So it's going to be pretty cool couple of years here, seeing what they can do with all that new technology. So that digital disruption then leads to changing applications. How can we deliver applications to those folks, on mobile devices, in remote offices, home offices, airplanes, trains, Ubers, whatever they're doing? Companies need to be able to have productive workforces regardless of where they're at and the speed or reliability even of their broadband connections. So at this point, if you were to look at an internet traffic map from an organization, almost half of their traffic is going to the public cloud at this point. So no longer is it between one office to another office. It's from one office to a cloud provider, is where nearly the majority of their traffic is going. Last year, according to EMA research, about 13 cloud applications were in use at an average organization. So I think the last stat we had on that was from 2010, and it was around 4 apps. So that has grown significantly, more than 3x in the last few years here. Then you go to the Internet of Things, right? It's a significant source of traffic at this point. All the device polling, think about, the smart thermostats and the cameras and all the stuff out there that, devices are phoning home and giving the OEMs data on those devices. So, and of course, the number of just sheer devices in an enterprise is up 84%. So what does SD-WAN have to do with all of this? Well, in our opinion, it has a lot to do with it from the perspective of customers are always looking for cheaper, faster, better solutions, right? And, I always kind of skip over the cheaper part because that's usually a difficult thing to overcome from a customer perspective if you're not able to sell the value. So let's just focus on, faster and more reliable. About 30% of enterprises will use SD-WAN products in all of their branches by the end of 2019. That doesn't maybe sound like an interesting stat, but again, if you go back to that first slide, only a few years ago, SD-WAN wasn't even a thought or a topic of conversation amongst most of us on the phone, right? The reason for that is obviously the need for MPLS networks is dwindling, right? Only the biggest of the biggest companies are even still maintaining or have it in their plans to renew and keep those networks in place. The 10 to 50 location companies are looking for every way possible to reduce their telecom expenses. And SD-WAN is a way to do that. Not only that, it's a way to capture additional revenue and future-proof those customers' networks by putting in appliances that aren't tied to a specific network provider, which is, we believe, one of our value props here is we're not tied to any specific network provider. We're very, very much focused on let the customer bring whatever connection they want, whatever connection they're comfortable with, whatever connections their channel partners recommend to them, and they can swap it out as often, as frequently as they'd like with no disruption to their business. The worldwide market is expected to be more than $6 billion by 2020, which is a 90% growth at this point since the inception of the SD-WAN market in just a few years. So big opportunity out there. Obviously, a lot of room for making money for the partners on the phone. Gartner basically has a few stats there that says customers deploying VDI and DAS should consider deploying SD-WAN to increase the reliability of the solution. Again, think about it. The customer has a single MPLS network, no redundancy or resiliency, and then potentially, prior to very recently at RapidScale, we would just become a node on that MPLS network for the customer. So a customer might have 50 locations, and they've got a single MPLS connection coming back to one of our facilities. It's a great design. It works, but a backhoe pulls up to their office and cuts that fiber. Not only are they have no internet access, but they have no desktops anymore. And potentially, if you've recommended hosted voice services to that same customer, they have no dial tone. So SD-WAN is being recommended enterprise-wide by not only us on the phone, but also by the analyst community as a valid solution to increase resiliency. The other quote here from Gartner is those looking for WAN optimization or dynamic path selection should really consider NetScaler, because NetScaler is one of the best in the marketplace at providing those services. And then, of course, it wouldn't be a Citrix product if they didn't focus on the optimization of their own protocols, such as HDX and ICA traffic. That is what powers the virtual desktop offerings. So we do have some Gartner clout, so to speak, around that particular product line. What are the basic characteristics of SD-WAN? I think most people on the phone likely know these, but I won't spend a ton of time on this slide. But the NetScaler particular product is application aware, meaning I don't have to go in and create a bunch of QoS policies at the NetScaler level. So there's a lot of other competing solutions out there that there are no default policies per se other than just voice. So for Citrix, it knows traffic just natively over 100 different protocols, and you can simply rely on the default configuration without much work to reliably protect those applications, and that's everything from voice, video, cloud traffic. It automatically deprioritizes things like email and file transfers and stuff like that in preference of the highly available reliability from those other protocols. So direct access to the cloud. The NetScaler is a pretty unique offering from the perspective is there's virtual editions of this appliance. And what that means is if I have a customer that's sitting in my data center and that same customer, let's say they have services in Amazon or Azure, and they want to create that same meshed SD-WAN-like connection back to Azure or AWS. Well, I can put a virtual edition of this NetScaler appliance in the Amazon AWS cloud or in the Microsoft Azure cloud. And you might say, well, what benefit does that have? Those networks are already widely redundant. Well, the benefit is really is one hop kind of reliability from the perspective of I create that tunnel directly into those clouds and into those resources, so it participates almost like it's on the same LAN segment. And again, I can prioritize traffic to Office 365 or to infrastructure in the AWS network. So it's very much, again, as I mentioned earlier, around future-proofing the network, I can also future-proof the customer from the cloud provider. So we don't expect that it's an all-or-nothing proposition when customers buy services from us. We know that they're going to have services from, other cloud solutions. I could even, deploy that in a data center where there might be connections to a hosted voice provider, for example. So like in Equinix, Northern Virginia site, maybe that customer has hosted voice from an 8x8 or a Vonage or something like that, and they want to have that network participate in the SD-WAN network. So again, this gives me a lot of options there from the virtualization perspective. So the NetScaler product, obviously it ensures application reliability, path selection. I can securely forward application traffic from the branch locations across the WAN to the internet directly. I don't need that hub and spoke model where everything goes back to a headquarters and then out to the providers. I can go directly to the providers. Of course, security. One of the great things that we like about the NetScaler product is I don't need a managed router from a carrier in front of it. It is a router, it is a firewall, and it is an SD-WAN appliance all in one. So I can support dynamic routing with BGP and OSPF and RIP and everything else that any particular customer would need, so long as that's an Ethernet-based circuit, right? For those telecom folks on the phone, it doesn't support a CSU, DSU, right? So I can't convert that circuit switched connection like a T1 or a DS3 or something like that into Ethernet natively in the device. So in that case, you still would need a managed router. But if it's fiber or Ethernet or even coax coming into a cable modem, I can patch that directly into the NetScaler appliances. So some key differentiator, obviously Citrix is preferenced when there's a desktop environment behind it or in front of it. Citrix does react instantaneously to network problems and outages. And I'll give you an example. At RapidScale, we do like to eat our own dog food per se. So we do in our East Coast office in Raleigh, where I happen to sit most of the time. We do have a NetScaler appliance there, and I have a 300 meg coax connection and a 100 meg Ethernet connection in the back of that NetScaler appliance. And when we deployed it, literally a default configuration. I didn't go in and create any rules, no policies. It took about 5 minutes to install the appliance. They are zero-touch deployments, meaning there's a master control node that sits in our cloud. In this particular case, it sits in our Sterling, Virginia data center that connects back to my Raleigh office. And all the configuration sits on that master control node. So as soon as the branch locations come up, it gets its config automatically. It takes about 8 seconds to boot the appliance. And right away, I saw green lights on both circuits in the config. I waited till right in the middle of the day when everybody was on the phone, and I went out and pulled one of the Ethernet cables out of the back of that appliance. Walked around, everybody's still on the phone. Nobody noticed, nobody screaming at me. I went back, patched that cable in, waited a minute or two, pulled the other connection out, walked around, still everybody's on their phone calls. And by the way, we do use a hosted voice service in globally. So we're all reliant upon the internet for our hosted voice solutions to work. And not only did we not drop a single packet, we didn't have any jitter, any buffering, any voice quality issues whatsoever. And that's a mixture of physical Polycom handsets as well as soft clients with USB headsets. And so it wasn't anything. And by the way, some of the laptops and whatnot in the office were on Wi-Fi as well. So that's a very unique differentiator with Citrix, because they do automatically, with no manual config, do packet duplication for the voice protocol. So it was duplicating packets out both links to the head end or the master control node in the RapidScale data center, and then forwarding that on to the voice provider. So I have same IP failover capabilities, but the benefit here is I'm getting use out of both my circuits real time. So it's not an active passive situation. It's active, and I can add, up to 4 connections in that particular appliance without any, hey, I'm just paying for this as an insurance policy. I'm actually real time using all of the services available, and they call that dynamic link aggregation with dual-ended QoS. So it sounds fancy, but that's essentially the use case I just provided you. That's what that means. So who to target the SD-WAN solutions for? Obviously, we like to use these personas, these buying personas. So these fancy little graphics here are, you've got your network engineer who's really concerned about, the reliability of the applications. You've got the business line owner that wants to make sure that the applications are usable. And then, of course, your C-levels that, want to ensure that they can migrate to the cloud and they can be agile. So earlier when I mentioned future-proofing that network, right? I put this appliance in, and again, I'll use my Raleigh office as an example because it's simple. I just have 2 different carriers patched in there. But if I decide tomorrow that I want to get rid of one of those carriers and replace it with a different carrier, I'm just popping an Ethernet cable and that's it. I don't need a static IP. I don't need any specific configuration. I just literally need an Ethernet handoff from whatever carrier. Unplug one, plug the new guy in, cancel it. I can do that in the middle of the day, and I have no zero downtime whatsoever, zero configuration. I don't need anything from anybody. So that really does provide a very agile environment. If you're looking at a carrier's solution, that's a long implementation cycle. That's a lot of router configurations on their side and a lot of QoS conversations around policies and what things are important and all that sort of stuff. I can deploy these in minutes anywhere in the US because the physical appliances are do zero-touch deployments. All I need is the MAC address of that appliance. As soon as it hits the internet, it phones home. We register it in the portal. We associate it to a master control node on our side, and we push that config down, and the customer is up and running. So it's very, very, very sleek and simple to deploy and not reliant upon any carrier. So plenty of target businesses, but obviously all the same companies types that you guys already sell to. So the brick and mortar, manufacturing, retail, financial, healthcare and logistics. Really any company with a physical office with a network connection is a very good target customer. I like this slide because it actually talks about some triggers or what would make a customer consider an SD-WAN solution. Again, these aren't rocket science, but I like the slide because it really talks to a handful of situations where it's a very, very easy sale. Customer gets a new application, right? That's a simple one. Let's say they go out and buy some hosted application and they want to ensure uptime and always on reliability. So the value there is a better user experience. Let's say they're having frequent outages. Everybody on this phone probably has sold a network out there that has some reliability issues at a particular branch or location in that enterprise environment. I certainly have numerous customer examples where they've got some remote locations that they cannot get a reliable connection out of those locations. So frequent outages obviously are a sales opportunity. MPLS contract renewal. I'm working on one of those right now where the customer has 35 or 40 locations and they simply just don't want that bill anymore, and I don't blame them. So put in lower cost DIA and broadband connections in place to replace that MPLS network is a win-win for sure. And of course, equipment refresh. We've actually had some opportunities come to us where customers bought some very expensive Silver Peak appliances where their maintenance is coming up for renewal and they simply don't want to own or manage that hardware anymore. And we can drop NetScaler in and it competes head to head with all the major appliances you've probably heard of, from Meraki to Silver Peak to iWAN and by the way, iWAN's not really a product; it's more of a reference architecture from multiple different Cisco products. But again, it competes very well there. So that's a very nice one as folks kind of dove into that market early, 3 or 4 years ago, and now no longer want to spend, 10 grand an appliance. So, anatomy of a deal. This is an opportunity we won recently. It's a customer up in, I believe, the Northeast area here. Yeah, in the East region. It's a manufacturing company. They had 22 locations on a Windstream MPLS network. About 3 or 4 of those locations were having constant issues. So if you go back to the previous slide where I mentioned, reliability at a handful of branches, this was that exact use case. This particular customer had 3 locations that were just, for the life of them, couldn't get them to stay online. We worked very closely with the partner of record on this opportunity to recommend a solution here. And this, is a typical customer, right? They're somewhere between, a year and 18 months left on all of their locations for MPLS. But as everyone on the phone knows, that's a much shorter window than it actually seems, because by the time you roll this out to all those locations and order broadband or DIA to every location, that 18 months goes by quick. So luckily we had a customer that understood that and was very much on board with, let's roll this out sooner than later, because it's a minor incremental cost to their overall spend. Their challenges were reliability. Some of the locations, speed. They were only getting like 4 or 5 meg connections at these remote locations. And of course, future network migration. So we're implementing this today with the Windstream MPLS. We are taking BGP routes directly on the NetScaler appliance, and then we're simply adding in coax connections to every location as the secondary solution. But again, because these appliances are zero-touch deployment, once they're physically installed, that customer can then start dismantling that MPLS network over the next year and replacing those MPLS connections with, DIA, which is their long-term plan, is to move to, a fiber-based Ethernet service where they can. Where they can't get that, they're going to go with, LTE backup connections, which, your typical cradle point type solution. As long as I have an Ethernet handoff, I'm good to go there. And they're gonna ultimately reduce their spend by about $20,000 a month once we're done with this project. So we've already implemented a handful of their locations, and we're slowly rolling out the rest, as this customer is pretty risk adverse. So we're doing 3 or 4 per week at this point. But again, you think about it, they're going to save $20,000 a month, get way better, way faster service, and a much better reporting solution, right? So I can show them real time what their MOS scores are, what their QoS configuration looks like, what their bandwidth consumption is at every site. Try to get that from a telecom provider like a Windstream is like open a ticket and wait 2 weeks, and you might get an MRTG graph back from them, right? So this, I give them portal access. They can log in, they can see it real time. It helps RapidScale from a troubleshooting perspective, because now we're not, when this is all done, we won't be reliant upon, the BGP configuration at Windstream. This will be pure, DIA, internet access, resiliency, and they can add a 3rd or a 4th connection to any location that they deem necessary for even additional resiliency and redundancy. But this is just one use case. So our solution came in at $7,500 a month for all locations, fully managed, fully deployed. And they were spending a little over $30,000 a month on their MPLS connection. So it's pretty slick solution. Again, what I would stress and reiterate here, because I think this was our last slide, is really the the network agnostic approach here at RapidScale. We're not, one of the many carriers that are out there pitching, Velo Cloud or Talari or, Big Leaf or whatnot. The other thing to note, and I think most of you probably know this, but if you look at a network-based SD-WAN solution, you're really reliant upon those peering points or those head-end locations. So if you think about, I'll just say brand X SD-WAN provider, they may have 4 or 5 POPs in the US where they aggregate all that traffic back to. But if the customer is a regional company, let's say they're in Florida and they've got 50 locations, 50 doctor's offices or dentist offices in Florida, heading all that traffic between branches all the way up to Atlanta is not going to improve their end user experience one bit, right? This is the challenge that I personally run into when we have folks that are recommending SD-WAN solutions to customers, is they don't take the time to understand where the point of presence is for that given SD-WAN provider, and understand that, hey, if I'm highly regionalized customer, I'm not a nationwide customer. All my locations are in one state. That particular SD-WAN provider doesn't have a POP in that state. Well, I wouldn't recommend that solution because it's actually going to cause latency or introduce latency that's unnecessary, and it's going to impact their application performance. Will it add resiliency and uptime? Absolutely. But that's only 2 checkboxes off the many that you should be thinking about when you're quoting an SD-WAN solution. So at RapidScale, we're not reliant on the network or any specific head-end or point of presence. We're very much deploying these exactly where the customer locations are, and we don't need to head in that traffic anywhere in particular, although we prefer that this is sold alongside, other RapidScale services. Of course, our data center then would become the master control node, and that's where all the traffic would head in. But we've had opportunities where customers want their headquarters location to be the aggregation point or the head end or the POP, so to speak, depending on what terminology you're familiar with. In which case, we can deploy a cluster of NetScaler appliances in their headquarters, and that becomes, it looks more like an MPLS deployment at that point from the perspective of a hub and spoke where the headquarters is the hub. But it future-proofs them from the perspective of they don't need any given network provider. They just need a couple per location. And they can then add virtual edition NetScalers in any cloud provider they want. And it just becomes another node on the network. So just consider that when you're looking and comparing solutions out there. Most of the physical appliances all have similar, call it plus or minus 10% of the same capabilities. The Citrix solution, in our opinion, and our testing and our research, is the most agnostic, as no proprietary protocols that it's using. It does come with full hardware maintenance and software maintenance. RapidScale does turn this into an operating expense for the customer. So I'm not asking this customer to buy this hardware one time. I'm providing this as a service to the customer. There's 3 physical hardware models that are all licensable bandwidth configs. So meaning the entry-level model scales from 20 megs of aggregate bandwidth to 150 megs. It's very, very, very cost effective. The next model scales up to 4 gigabits, and then the model above that is more carrier grade, 10 to 40 gigabit type service. So I haven't had a customer ask for that yet, but we are able to scale to multi 10 gig connectivity where required. So I will now open it up to any questions that may have come in over the chat that Summer and the marketing team need my help answering.
Yes, we have a lot. So I'm just going to pick some of these, you guys. So can you differentiate a little more between Citrix SD-WAN and others in the marketplace?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually have some slides that are very focused on that per product. Perhaps anyone on this call that would like kind of a one-on-one 30-minute deep dive on that, I can go into that at a very high level. One of the major differentiators is that packet duplication. So it's not session-based failover. So this is key, guys. A lot of the hardware appliances out there are session-based failover, meaning it'll send one session, and let's use SIP as an example. It'll send one SIP connection out, connection A. It'll send the next SIP connection out, connection B, and it'll keep going back and forth on that unless the latency becomes too heavy on one of the connections. Connection A fails, well, all the SIP connections are disconnected and reconnected on connection B. Now, a fair number of the voice providers, that will just introduce a few seconds of silence on the handset, but they won't drop the call. However, there are other voice providers out there that have a much higher sensitivity to that, and they would drop the call and have to dial back in. That doesn't happen on the NetScaler appliance because the NetScaler appliance does not do a session-based failover. It does packet-based failover. So if you have a SIP connection out provider A, it's actually sending those packets out all providers that are plugged into the appliance. So if there is and it's reassembling them on the far end, by the way, in sequence. So that's why you can unplug a connection or you can have an outage situation on a provider and you don't get that pause or silence for a couple of seconds while it's failing over. So there's zero downtime in this configuration. And I think that's the major differentiator. Possibly the other one is the fact that it is a router and firewall in one. So I can do everything in a single device as opposed to having a separate managed router, a separate firewall, and a separate, overlay type SD-WAN appliance. So many of my customers out there have Meraki's, sitting next to a firewall. And I can simply displace both of those devices and replace it with an SD-WAN, and I can support BGP directly from a carrier without a managed router in place. So I think those are the two main ones. I have a speeds and feeds deck that can go into head-to-head competition with VeloCloud, Telari, Silver Peak, iWAN, and Meraki, and Viptela as well, which is a relatively newer one. So if you want more information on that, reach out to your channel manager and we could set up a one-on-one.
Okay, how are custom applications prioritized?
Simply by the protocol or the port that they're communicating on. So if we can understand what port that particular application is communicating on, it's a simple one line of configuration in the NetScaler. So I would these days most custom applications are either communicating over SQL ports, TCP 1433 for example, or they're over 80 or 443. So they're very, very simple to prioritize those.
Okay. Does the firewall capability include UTM, packet filtering, VPN, etc.?
So it does not, and here's the reason why. So what happens in most of our deployments these days is we really just need basic firewalling at the branch because there's no direct internet traffic going out the branch, even though they have both connections in there that are DIA or broadband or whatever they might be. All the traffic is actually going out wherever the head end appliance is. In RapidScale's case so far, that's always been our data center. And at our data center, we actually provide a virtual Fortinet appliance to our customers for all of that UTM, IDS, IPS, antivirus, all of that, spam filtering, everything else out that Fortinet. So really what we're looking to protect at the physical branch location is we're just basically protecting against a breach, right? So we're not really trying to have a decentralized content filtering or IDS, IPS solution where we're forcing all traffic to go back to the master control node and then out to the internet from there. So the firewalling at the branch, and this is a great question because I have a lot of customers where their content filters have to be updated at every single location when they make a change to their sonic wall or their ASA or whatever device they have on site. It's not being centrally controlled. So we prefer to do that at a central firewall where all the traffic is routed out the data center and we can control that UTM functionality there. hopefully that answers the question.
I'm going to do like one or two more, you guys, because there's so many coming in, but I'll make sure Dwayne answers them and we can send them over in our follow-up email. Oh gosh, what to do? Can it be deployed using internet?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it can be deployed over the internet. No issues there whatsoever. Again, most of our deployments are using MPLS and internet, and then they're still in the phases of getting rid of those MPLS connections.
Okay, and finally, any pricing details that you can offer?
That's a good question. We probably should have thrown a pricing slide up there. So what I would say is I believe we start around, I think it's $350 a month for the smallest physical appliance, which is so far the majority of what we've deployed. And then that scales up from there, just depending on the bandwidth needs for the customer. So if you're comparing this to an IWAN or something like that, it's going to look expensive. But if you put in all of the cost variables in there around not needing a managed router from the carrier, not needing a separate firewall, all of those additional costs, we've actually come out ahead in every deal that we've won so far. So keep in mind that's a much more robust appliance than a Meraki or something like that. Good question.
Okay, well, I'm going to have Dwayne answer the rest of your guys' questions, and we'll send those to you in the follow-up email, because there's just so many coming in, and I want to make sure they get all answered. So we can wrap it up.
All right. Well, thanks for joining, everyone. Very, very happy you took the time out of your day to listen to me speak about SD-WAN here today. And as mentioned at the beginning of the call, this is a recorded session. We'll post this to our partner portal here shortly this afternoon. And thanks again for joining. Our next webinar will be moderated by Bobby Cannon in October. So look forward to seeing you guys there. Thanks.